ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. The subject before us is something related to the Bhagavad Gita, the most popular spiritual classic of Hindu Vedantic heritage. That is the evolution of the karma ideal in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita teaches many great spiritual ideas. There are many spiritual disciplines talked about and expounded in this great spiritual classic. Maybe the most relevant subject for the Bhagavad Gita for our times is perhaps the ideal of Karma Yoga. Now in the Gita, the word karma is used in different contexts. The word itself literally means action or activity. So it comes from the Sanskrit root kr, which means to do something, to be engaged in some kind of activity. And this karma, the word, is used in different philosophical systems of India in different contexts and with different meanings. For example, it is used in the sense as one's own appointed duty and responsibility. Maybe a husband or wife or brother or sister, or maybe a doctor or engineer or teacher or student. All of them have their own responsibility or duty according to the work they are doing, or according to the work they are expected to be doing, their status in society or in family. But that work itself is just an activity. But the same activity, when done with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and with full integrity, then it becomes Swadharma, according to our status or position in society and our own qualifications and our role in that particular social or family context. The same karma is used in many other senses also, with other connotations also. For example, in the traditional Hindu family structure, every householder was expected to be responsible. It was his duty to do Panchamaha-yajnas. For example, he should look after his guests, he should look after his fellow human beings around, and he should do things in a way that helps him to preserve the ancient tradition, the cultural heritage, and then he should be compassionate towards all living beings. So you find Bhuta Yajna, Nri Yajna, and Rishi Yajna or Deva Yajna, and so on. And he is also responsible for performing certain duties that ensure the continuation of the spiritual heritage of which he is a part. And then he has to perform certain Vedic rituals, Agnihotras and so on. So they used to be called Nitya Karmas, which every householder in the family was expected to perform. Then there was Naimittika Karmas. He may have to engage in certain rituals or sacraments in his family context. For example, when a child is born, there should be an auspicious ceremony for giving a proper name to the child, the first feeding with regular food, and so on. Then there were also certain rituals, which Kamya Karmas, done with a specific motive. So you can read about this in Indian scriptures. For example, people used to perform certain Vedic rituals for rains, maybe for prosperity in their family, even for progeny, for example, Putra Kameshti and so on. And also certain rituals that guarantee going to heaven after their death, and so on. It's called Kamya Karmas. Then there were Pradishiddha Karmas, certain activities where they were not allowed to do, prohibited activities. For example, drinking, drug addiction, or engaging in other undesirable activities were forbidden. It was called pradishiddha karmas. Then there were also parihara karmas and so on. If somebody makes a mistake or commits a in undesirable activity, he should do something to remedy the evil consequences of this undesirable action. So there were different kinds of karmas recommended and prescribed in the ancient Vedic texts. So you can find, as I mentioned, Nitya Karma, Naimitya Karma, Kamya Karma, Pradishiddha Karma, and so on. Now, they were all karmas more or less performed as rituals or as formal responsibilities on the part of the householder. Now, you can find in the Shankaracharya's commentaries on the Prasthanatraya, there is Bhashyas, the Upanishad Bhashyas, Brahma Sutra Bhashyas, and Gita Bhashyas, you find many statements. For example, he makes it a point that the highest spiritual liberation cannot be attained through any of these activities. So we should always remember, whenever in Vedanta or in the works of Adi Shankaracharya, a statement is made where Shankaracharya says that action by itself is imperfect. Actions or karmas cannot take us to the highest spiritual goal, the highest spiritual emancipation. What Shankaracharya means is, none of these activities, that is, actions or rituals performed with a definite motive, can take us to the highest spiritual goal. So when he rejects karmas in the bhashyas, what he's rejecting is these kinds of kama karmas, rituals, Vedic rituals performed with a definite material goal in view. Those activities cannot take us to the highest spiritual goal. At the same time, all these activities also become a royal highway to the highest spiritual emancipation when performed as Swadharma or Karma Yoga. Whatever we do, when we do without a selfish motive, let's say with a sense of offering to God, the karma or action and also its results, without any attachment, without any selfish desire, without any selfish motive, if we perform any of our activities, for example, a teacher teaching the university, a student studying, an engineer doing his work, a doctor doing his work in a hospital, any kind of these secular activities, if done as an offering to God without a selfish motive, we may have a motive, but we should not be obsessed with that motive. We should not be obsessed with the desire to enjoy the results of our actions. Actions will certainly produce results, but we should not be too much obsessed, too much attached to the results of those actions. If we perform these activities with a degree of detachment and non-attachment, then the same actions will become a royal highway to the highest spiritual goal. So Shankaracharya says, for example, karmanishtayaha chitta suddhidvarena purushartha heduttum na swatantrena jnannishtadu swatantrena purushartha heduhu anyan apeksha. What it means is simple. Any activity when done without a selfish motive, as karma yoga, when we join karma with yoga, yoga here means non-attachment, mentally offering the results of our actions to God. Ishwararpana buddhya, as Shankaracharya says. When we do that, or for the good of humanity, even if you don't believe in God, you can practice non-attachment and unselfishness. When you think, well, what I am doing is for the good of humanity. If a doctor working in a hospital, if he does his job, he certainly he will get his benefits, but then he should not be too much obsessed with the desire to enjoy those benefits. That should not be his prime motive. So whenever that desire catches our mind, entraps our mind, then mentally we should offer, well, this is for the benefit of others, for the benefit of humanity. With this motive, with this idea in mind, if we do our duty, then the same karma becomes actually, as I mentioned, a road to the highest spiritual emancipation. That's why Swami Vivekananda says, Atmano mokshartham jagatitayacha. It becomes a tool for our own spiritual emancipation, Atmano mokshartham. At the same time, it becomes an instrument, it becomes a means for the good of the world, for the benefit of humanity in general. That means Atmano mokshartham jagathidayacha. So you can find Swami Vivekananda's concept of practical Vedanta is actually a modern interpretation of these central teachings of Bhagavad Gita. That is, whatever we do, we must do with a sense of duty, with a sense of responsibility, with a sense of sacredness and sanctity, full integrity and honesty. Then every action can become a tool, can become a means for our highest spiritual liberation. This is the central teaching of Bhagavad Gita. So if a person who practices this karma yoga, when he becomes too old, when he cannot do anything physically or mentally or intellectually, then what happens? Karma drops, but yoga continues. Any person who does his duty with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, with a, let's say, offering the results to God or for the good of humanity, without obsessive attachment to the results. That is called non-attachment, or sometimes you may call detachment. If we do whatever we do, whatever we are doing every day, without a selfish, obsessive attachment and desire for enjoying the results of our actions for ourselves, without this desire, that means with detachment or non-attachment, then every activity becomes a spiritual practice. That is, first we may begin, in the beginning of our spiritual journey, we may perhaps draw a line of demarcation between action and contemplation, secular and spiritual. This is possible. We may not be able to do everything as an act of worship, as karma yoga, with sanctity and sacredness. We may not be able to do. We may not be able to practice non-attachment at the beginning of our spiritual journey. That's okay. So at the beginning, perhaps we can slowly try to imbibe this ideal. Then slowly we will be able to practice this karma yoga. Every act as an act of worship. Slowly what happens, the very concept of action disappears because it merges with the concept of worship. Then action and worship become one. Karma merges with yoga. And if such a person, when he becomes old, when he cannot be active, he will not suffer from depression, he will not suffer from frustration. Then what happens? His action stops, but yoga continues. And he will be able to enjoy life even when he is active, and when he cannot any longer be engaged in activity because of old age or any other problem, still he will not be frustrated. He will be able to practice yoga. When karma drops, yoga continues. This is the highest teaching of Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita teaches many great teachings. Highly philosophical, metaphysical ideas are there. But if somebody asks me the question, what teaching from the Gita will be most relevant and of most practical utility for our times in this modern 21st century, this age of information technology, when life has become very complex and there are many challenges, then if somebody asks me the question, what teaching from the Gita is the most relevant and useful for our times, then we would be able to say this ideal of Karma Yoga, or you may call it another name, Swadharma. That is the highest teaching that is relevant for our times. Now, Lord Krishna doesn't begin with this highest ideal when he talks about Karma Yoga. In the dialogue between Arjuna and Lord Krishna, it doesn't expound this highest Karma Yoga ideal at the beginning. In fact, if you look at the evolution of the Karma ideal in the Gita, you can see that in the first chapter, Arjuna complains to Lord Krishna, "Oh Lord, I cannot do anything. I am not able to decide what is my duty, and I am not able to do. I am becoming mentally and physically weak." You may call it withdrawal symptom, you may call it melancholia, we may call it inner conflicts. Dushtaimam Sajanam Krishna Yutsum Samavastidam Sidanti Mamagatrani Mukham cha Parisushyadi Vebadusya Sarire me Roma Hasasya Jayade Gandhivam Samsade Hastat Tutchaiva Paridakhyade. You can find the 28th verse of the first chapter of the Gita. Arjuna tells Krishna, "Oh Lord, seeing my own people, my relations all around me, I am not able to decide what to do. My body is becoming weak. My mind is becoming confused. So, remember, I shall give a little description of the context. Gita, as you all know, was preached in a battlefield. We should very clearly remember that Gita is not a book about battle, or it's not a book about war. Here, battlefield is our own mind. When our mind is filled with conflicts, full of agitations, when we feel that we are not able to do what we want to do, we know what to do, but when we try to do, our mind doesn't cooperate. Our mind becomes unfriendly, non-cooperative when we want to do what we know we should do. At such a moment, Arjuna becomes highly deluded. So it is a metaphor for the conflicts that people are facing in modern times. When there are many things that we would like to do, if we could, but when we try to do, our mind creates a stumbling block. Mind doesn't allow us to do what we want to do. So, in such a context, we should ask a wise person, or we should consult a scripture, or we should think how to overcome this problem. So, in the context, in the historical context, this exposition of the Bhagavad Gita took place in a place called Kurukshetra, which is almost 80 kilometers away from New Delhi, which is capital of India. The place is situated between two rivers, Yamuna and Saraswati. The river Saraswati is no more a river today because it has dried up, it has become invisible. According to geologists, it has gone underground, it is fully dried up. But during the Mahabharata times, it was a flowing river. So between these two rivers, this place called Kurukshetra, where this event took place. And Arjuna belongs to the clan of these Kurus. He was the Madhyama Pandava. There were 5 brothers, Pandava brothers, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula and Sakadeva. Among the 5, Arjuna was specially chosen by Lord Krishna because he was the right person to learn a high ideal, because whatever he learns, he will practice, he will try to practice, he will try to implement in his life. Yudhishthira was the senior most Pandava. He was himself a great philosopher and he was a learned man. So Krishna knew that uh, it was no use teaching him, because he already know all these things in theory, but he will not be able to implement, or he will not have the mind to implement whatever instruction is given to him. And Bhima was, of course, not so philosophically minded. Arjuna, in many ways, represents the common man in modern times. Arjuna, in a way, he is a representative of humanity in general. He wants to do great things. He wants to do everything in the right manner, but he is facing conflicts. He is a noble-hearted person. He is an idealist, but at the same time he has conflicts. If somebody could teach him what to do, how to practice a great spiritual ideal in his life, he will do his best to practice that. So he came to the battlefield. Now remember, Arjuna's coming to the battlefield should be understood in the context. Let us say, suppose a security guard, his duty is to protect, let's say he is stationed in front of a school to protect the students and teachers, or maybe in a street to protect the people living in that particular street from evil elements, let us say. If the security guard suddenly decides, well, I can't do my duty, and he throws away his weapons, it will indirectly, he will become the cause of a lot of trouble and problems and in fact violence to other people. So his practice of non-violence can indirectly lead to a lot of violence happening all around him. So his duty is to use his position and his responsibility and the tools that he has in his hands to protect people around him. That's what he's paid for, and that is what he's appointed for. So Arjuna, coming to the battlefield to protect the common people, his own family, his mother was suffering, his wife was suffering, his brothers were driven away, he himself was driven away from his home and his country and his villages. So he was deprived of whatever belonged to him, and they had to live like beggars. His mother and his brothers and his relations, they were deprived of their properties. So it was a duty of a brave son of Kundi, that his mother's name, to do his duty to get them back what actually belonged to them. So that was the context. But when the real situation came, Arjuna became weak and confused, and he says, well, I would like to live like a beggar. Instead of working hard to get back to his family what actually belonged to them, he says, well, I cannot do my work, so I will run away from battlefield, and I will rather become a beggar. Guru nahatvahi mahanubhavan sriyo bhuktum bhaiksham avihaloke atvatha kamastu guru nihaiva bhunjiya bhogan rudhira pradigdhan. So that's what he says. Guru nahatvahi mahanubhavan, that's what he says. So he says, instead of doing my duty, I would rather live like a beggar. So Arjuna was actually practicing, he was behaving like an imbecile. So that is the lowest of human characteristics, tamoguna, steeped in inertia, inaction, ignorance, delusion and conflicts and melancholia. That was his condition. So the first chapter in which Arjuna begins his conversation, his dialogue with Lord Krishna, Dushtvevam Sujanam Krishna, 28th verse. The first chapter ends with a wonderful statement, that is the 47th verse. Evam muktva aduna sankhe rudobhasta uvavishat visurja sasaram chapam shoka samvigna manasakha. Evam muktva aduna sankhe rudobhasta upavishat visurja sasaram chapam shoka samvigna manasakha. Arjuna, he threw away his weapons, a soldier who was stationed to protect nation, a society of people, poor people, women folk, helpless people, weak men and women, from evildoers. The soldier suddenly says, no, I can't do my duty. What will happen? a lot of problems will occur, and people whom he was supposed to protect, they will suffer misery. They may be killed. They may be looted by the evildoers, by violent people. So his inaction will lead to lot of problems, society and family. So that is what Arjuna did. So remember, Lord Krishna is not talking about war or battle in the Gita. He is talking about a duty. Suppose Arjuna was a doctor and he is he is serving in a hospital, and he may be a well-known surgeon, and a patient has come, and maybe the hospital expects him to perform a surgery, and if the surgeon says, no, I can't do that. Or if Arjuna was an engineer and his duty is to make sure that the building that he constructs is stable, is strong, is secure, or a bridge that he's constructing will stand, is strong and secure. Instead of doing that, the engineer, no, I can't take care of that. Or the doctor says, no, I cannot treat the patient. Like that, Arjuna says, no, I can't do my duty. So any sensible person, a wise teacher will tell him, no, you should perform your, if he is a doctor, you should do your surgery. If you are an engineer, you should do the duty of an engineer. If you are a teacher, you can't say, no, I won't teach. Students are getting ready for examinations, and if a teacher tells the students, no, I can't teach, then he is not fit to be there as a teacher. Like that, Lord Krishna first tries to scold Arjuna. Klaibhyam mas bhagavam pata naidattva upapadyade kshudram khrutaya daurbalyam tiktva uttishta varandava. Lord Krishna says, Arjuna, this weakness, this imbecility, this mental and physical weakness is not becoming of you, because you already have a reputation as a man, as a responsible person, as a dutiful person who can be relied upon, who can be dependent upon to do what is expected to do. So you should first of all do your work properly. And this imbecility, this inertia, this inaction is the most despicable thing. Therefore, instead of talking about karma yoga, Lord Krishna begins his conversation by emphasizing sakama karma. Instead of keeping quiet, being lazy, being an imbecile, it's far better to become an ambitious person. Do your work, maybe with a selfish motive. You may be a selfish person, but you are not lazy, you are not an imbecile. You are far better than a person who is lazy and imbecile, because imbecility and laziness can lead to hypocrisy. One may pretend to practice nishkama karma, that is doing our duty without desire, but actually he may be practicing nishkarma kama, which means instead of practicing nishkama kama, instead of practicing action without desire, he may be practicing desire without action. It's far better to practice action with desire than practicing desire without action. So, Lord Krishna's first step is, in the evolution of karma ideal, is to emphasize the importance of sakama karma. Doing our duty with a sense of responsibility, with a sense of purpose, maybe with a lot of obsessive attachment, but still do your duty somehow. And then Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, well, you are doing your duty and that will make you prosperous. If you do your work with a sense of motive, lot of attachment, selfish purpose, you may become very successful in the empirical sense of the word, in the worldly sense. You may become a famous person, you may be able to make a lot of money, a lot of wealth. You may have high status in society. But if you are the richest person in the world, and most successful industrialist, but still if you cannot sleep without taking sleeping pills, if you are suffering from anxiety, neurosis and depression and all kinds of psychosomatic problems or psychological problems, then that's not a very successful life. So, obsessive action, engaging in responsibilities and duties with a lot of attachment, may help us to become successful only in part. That success only a partial success, because we won't be able to enjoy the results of that success because of extreme anxiety caused by concerns for the results of our actions. That will be a great disturbance, because any person who does his duty with a lot of selfish motive, too much obsessed with the results, he will be always thinking about the result, whether he will be able to obtain the results that he is aiming for, whether his action will be actually effective or not, whether the company will collapse or not, the share markets, the stock markets will function properly or not. So there is a lot of risk, and there is always the possibility of failure or a disaster in the life of a person who is apparently successful, because he is able to do a lot of work, a lot of selfish motive. So it's certainly far better than doing nothing, but still it is not enough to give us a sense of inner contentment and satisfaction, what we call kritagrityada and kritarthata. It doesn't give us lasting contentment if we are successful, but still if we are not able to enjoy the results of our success, because too much of anxiety and worry produced by our desire in our mind, produced by attachment, doesn't allow us to enjoy the success of our life. So Lord Krishna says, for that you have to add something else with this karma ideal. So that is yoga. So instead of doing karma with lot of with a lot of obsession, attachment for the results of our actions, we must practice a degree, a little bit of detachment or non-attachment. Then what happens? We can do work. At the same time, the work will not sit heavily on our shoulders. It will be sitting lightly on our shoulders. Suppose you are bearing a heavy weight, a huge heavy box on your head. Suppose there is a millimeter gap between the box you are carrying and also your head, then your head will not feel the weight of the box. And that gap is yoga, non-attachment. So if you can practice non-attachment along with efficiency, along with enthusiasm, along with management skills, then what happens? Our mind will not fall sick. Our mind will will enjoy a kind of inner contentment and satisfaction. Mind will remain in a state of contentment if we practice karma yoga. So karma is not enough. For true success in life, karma should be reinforced, refined with this yoga ideal. Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Lord Krishna says in the second chapter, Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya. You do your work, but yogastha, be established in yoga. Becoming established in yoga means samatvam siddhya siddho samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. We should practice action But when our mind worries too much about the results of our action or activity, then we should remember that that concern, that worry is going to kill us psychologically. So we should practice samatvam. Samatvam is siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva. Whether our action will produce the expected results or not, we should be able to practice an equanimity of mind, an inner poise and balance of the mind. That is yoga. Buddhi yukto jahadiha ube sugradushkude tasma yoga yujyasu yoga karmasu kaushalam. So this practice of non-attachment along with efficiency, along with enthusiasm, along with management skills, it is called kaushalam. Kaushala here means efficiency. That is, on the one hand, we are able to enjoy the results of our actions. On the other hand, we are able to avoid the problems of action. Action, as I mentioned, will always produce problems. Even when we are engaged in action, we'll be concerned, anxious about the expected results. And when the results are not up to the expectation, we'll become terribly disappointed. When the results are beyond expectation, we may become jubilant. So both should be avoided. But at the same time, we should be careful. It should not lead to inaction. In the same context, Lord Krishna says, Karmanyeva adhigaraste ma phaleshu gidajana ma karma phalahedurbhuhu ma ste sankustu akarmani. Te karmanyeva adhigara. It means you have right only in action. But don't worry, don't be a cause of the results of our actions. Means we should not worry much about the result. Actually, if we focus completely on the work in our hand, without much worry, we will be able to bring in more energy, more concentration, and more efficiency and more effectiveness into whatever we are doing. On the other hand, if our mind is distracted by worries, by concerns, then what happens? A lot of mental energy may be lost. So we will not be able to do the work with real effectiveness, because a part of our mental energy may be lost by distraction. So to avoid that, what we must do, we should be able to do the work with a degree of non-attachment. Non-attachment can help us to avoid this problem of dissipation of our energy resources. This is called efficiency in action. So remember, with regard to efficiency, with regard to effectiveness, with regard to enthusiasm, there is no difference between a man who is possessed by a desire for enjoyment and engaging in activities all the time, and another person who is as efficient as the other person but who is detached, who is non-attached. Actually, the only difference is the yogi is non-attached. He is not less efficient, he is not less effective, he is not less successful. Actually, he is much more successful, more efficient, and more effective. But the difference is the yogi is non-attached, and the other person for whom karma become a karma yoga, it can be made disease or sickness. What happens? Such a person is working but is too much concerned, full of concern and worry, that makes him psychologically sick because of his extreme obsessive desire for the results of actions. That is saktaha karmanya vidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kuryat vidvan tatha asaktaha jigishu loka sangraham. So Lord Krishna says, those who are extremely attached, they do work with great enthusiasm. But those who are non-attached, the yogi, he practices the same degree of efficiency and enthusiasm, actually much higher degree. At the same time, he is doing everything for the good of others. That is the secret of the great spiritual teachers in the world who have done so much of work within very short lifespans. Look at Shankaracharya, a man who lived for 32 years. He is, of course, as everyone knows, he is the original exponent of Advaita philosophy, who is the one who first gave a philosophical interpretation to Vedic literature, the Upanishads. And Bhagavad Gita that we are discussing today, it became a world classic because he wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita and also Brahma Sutras. And along with that, he is also the author of the most exquisite, the most moving, the most profound devotional poetry in Sanskrit language. He wrote 65 great poems, each of them so profound, so philosophical, and so devotional. And he founded 10 monastic orders. Ignatius Loyola founded one monastic order. Shankaracharya is the founder of 10 monastic orders, all of them still surviving. And again, he went all over Indian subcontinent 4 times, all the way from extreme north, close to Tibetan border, to extreme south, and extreme east to extreme west. 4 times he walked. He installed hundreds of temples, and he established his Panchadevata Puja, the householders' traditional way of worshipping Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, Subramanya, Ganapati, Kumar, all this he started. At the same time, he founded 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India, all within 32 years. And he became a monk when he was 7 years, and he wrote the most exquisite, most profound philosophical classics in Sanskrit language, which Swami Vivekananda brought to Western world in 19th century, and he lived for 32 years. He could do so much because he was practicing Karma Yoga, the highest karma ideal. Look at Swami Vivekananda, 39 years. He was the one who brought this Vedanta to Western world, and within a short lifespan of 39 years, he established, he brought in a new monastic ideal. It's a continuation of Shankaracharya's monastic ideal, but he gave a new orientation. And he was the one who expounded for the first time the highest Indian philosophy and the highest Indian spiritual teachings in modern English language. Thanks to him that we are discussing Vedanta today. And his teacher, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, he lived for a very, very short time, just about 50 years, nearly 50 years. So you find they could do so much. Or in fact, I am giving this lecture in the old Hindu temple of San Francisco, Swami Tribhuvanathidananda. He came here at the beginning of 1903, and he passed away in 1915. Just about 13 years within this short period. Swami Tribhuvanathidananda, he built this temple. Remember, the first Hindu temple in the Western world. He reorganized the Vedanta society here, and he started publication. And even when the San Francisco earthquake took place, this great Karma Yogi was walking around the city, consoling people, helping people who had suffered during these 1906 earthquakes in San Francisco. So these are grand examples of great Karma Yoga in action. Jesus Christ, he also had a very short life. So you find some of the greatest spiritual teachers of the world are glorious, they're grand living illustrations of the highest karma ideal preached in the Bhagavad Gita. So, in other words, this karma ideal, when it becomes karma nishtha, then it becomes natural to a great spiritual person. That is called karma nishtha. So, the most despicable level is inaction, inactivity, imbecility, tamoguna. That was Arjuna's condition, as he explained in his own words in the 28th verse of the first chapter, Drishtva Sujanam Krishna, etc. And then Lord Krishna slowly lifts him to a higher ideal, that is Sakama Karma. Instead of doing nothing and worrying and crying and weeping and sleeping and being deluded, try to do something with enthusiasm, with efficiency. Maybe if you cannot practice Karma Yoga, don't worry, practice Sakama Karma. Do something with a motive. Lord Krishna himself says in the Gita, Na buddhivedam janayeda jnanam karma sanginam. If somebody is practicing sakama karma, action with desire, lot of enthusiasm, efficiency, don't ask him to start practicing niskama karma, karma yoga overnight. If he tries to, if a student who is preparing for examination, expecting a high grade, if you ask him, no, don't worry about the results, you should not do that, because that will be a disaster to him. So, the evolution from sakama karma, action with desire, to action without desire, you have to travel some distance. It doesn't happen overnight. That's why Lord Krishna says, Na buddhi vedam janayed. It should happen slowly through spiritual evolution. You practice more and more sagama karma with great integrity, sincerity, and also if you practice prayer, meditation, then slowly sagama karma will evolve into niskama karma. And then niskama karma will become karma yoga. Karma yoga becomes karma nishtha, where karma yoga becomes natural to you. That's, as I mentioned just now, the secret of these great spiritual giants of the world who did so much. In fact, if you ask somebody who are the greatest and most active, most efficient people the world has seen, I would say these great spiritual teachers, Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya, in fact, there's a great statement from K.M. Munshi, who was the founder of Bharati Vidya Bhavan. He says, the great Shankara combined in his short life of 32 years, he combined the energy resources of thousands of Napoleons. That's what K.M. Munshi says. This boy who started his monastic life when he was 7 years, he compressed in his life, he condensed in his life the energy resources of thousands of Napoleons. You can just imagine somebody walking 4 times Indian subcontinent. In 8th century, Indian subcontinent included actually right up to, let's say, the Bay of Bengal up to the Afghanistan, Persian border, Afghanistan-Iran border, east to west, and then south to north from Sri Lanka right up to the extreme northern parts going beyond Tibet. That is a huge Indian subcontinent of 8th century. So, and he walked 4 times, founded 10 monastic orders, and wrote the most profound philosophical classics and the most profound devotional poet, Vivekananda, in the 19th century. Within 39 years, he is proud that great Vedanta philosophy around the world, and Sri Ramakrishna. And as I mentioned, Swami Tirunadayananda, who is the founder of the Vedanta Society, the temple where we are now giving this lecture. Within 15 years, he did such a gigantic work here. All because they did so much, but they were not attached. The karma yoga had become second nature to them. That is karma nishtha. So these are the levels of evolution. From total inaction to action with desire. From there to the next stage, action without desire. Then it becomes karma yoga. Then it becomes karma nishtha. So, if a person can practice this karma yoga and karma nishtha, then he will be able to achieve everything in this world. That's why you know how Gita concludes. Yatra yogeshara krishno yatra partho dhanudhara tatra sri vijayo bhudit dhruva nitir matir mama. That's how Gita concludes. That is 78th verse of the 18th chapter. Wherever these two ideals combine, they blend. That is yoga, yogeshara Krishna, and dhanudhara Partha means. Partha, Arjuna, is a metaphor for action, enthusiasm, efficiency. And Krishna, yoga, is a metaphor for the highest philosophy of non-attachment, spiritual wisdom, yogic wisdom. If yoga and karma, if action and contemplation, Lord Krishna is the symbol of yoga, and Arjuna is the symbol of karma, or let's say secular prosperity. They combine together, there will be victory, prosperity, justice, stability in society and in families. There will be continuation, there will be progress, prosperity, everything. That's how Gita concludes. What it means is, yoga here means the ability to look beyond material prosperity. That's what it means. That's the meaning. So Shankarananda Saraswati, who is a minor commentator here, Tikakara, who was a great follower of Shankaracharya, he says, while describing Rajarshi ideal, he says, Rajattum Aishwarya Sambatti Rishittum Tasyaha Sukshmartha Darsana Kshamattum. It means, there is a verse in the 4th chapter of Gita, that's the reference. Imam vivasade yogam proktavana vayam vivaswan manave praka manu ikshakavaya bravi evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidhu sakalena iha mahada yugo nashtapantava. These two verses describe the lineage of the great spiritual wisdom preached in the Gita. It's called yoga. It is certainly, remember, it is not hatha yoga, what we normally understand by yoga, this taught in yoga studios, which essentially means standing on your head. But Gita teaches you to stand on your feet, spiritually speaking. That's the real meaning of yoga. What's the yoga? The yoga is a combination, a blending of the highest efficiency and action, and also calm contemplation. That's why they are called Rajarshi, Rajanascha Rishayasya Rajashaya. If you can combine the efficiency, the dynamism of a king, and the tranquility, the calmness, and the contemplative nature of a sage, that is called Rajarshi ideal. Which means secular prosperity and spiritual contemplation combined. And Shankarananda Saraswati says, when a person becomes successful in material life, and also he is able to see the limitation of material prosperity, then he becomes a Rajarshi. Rajattum Aishwarya Sambatti. A king is naturally prosperous, successful, efficient, enthusiastic, and so on. But if that king is able to see the limitation of that success, that prosperity, because success and material prosperity won't last long, they are not eternal. This realization makes him a wise person. He becomes a philosopher king. It is of course goes beyond the scope of interpreting Plato's ideal of philosopher king, because perhaps Plato's ideal limits that concept to a kind of common sense wisdom. But Rajarshi ideal includes a profound spiritual element in it, because when you become prosperous, and also when you become aware of the limitation of material prosperity, then you become spiritually wise. That spiritual wisdom, that spiritual common sense is the essence of the highest karma ideal preached in the Gita. So I have tried to give a broad view of some aspects of the evolution of the karma ideal in the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.